Hello, High Commissioner. Welcome back. Thank you for making the time.
Thank you very much, Vassi, and I'd love to be here anytime.
I want to start off and ask you very directly, if, High Commissioner, you have not done anything wrong, why are you not cooperating with Canadian authorities?
So there are a couple of things. We needed to see some evidence on the basis of which we can converse with our Canadian counterparts. Unfortunately, not a shred of evidence has been shared with us. Any evidence which is shared has to be legally acceptable. We are a country of rule of law, and so is Canada. So therefore, anything which is acceptable in the Canadian court of law would largely also be acceptable in the Indian court of law, and therefore that evidence will work. Unfortunately, we have not got anything from any Canadian official which can lead us to a better spot.
So let me ask you then, because the RCMP, our policing agency, has framed it very differently. I'm going to read exactly what they said about this issue in their statement. The Deputy Commissioner of Federal Policing, Mark Flynn, made attempts to meet with his Indian law enforcement counterparts to discuss violent extremism occurring in Canada and India and present evidence pertaining to agents of the government of India's involvement in serious criminal activity in Canada. These attempts were unsuccessful. Therefore, Deputy Commissioner Flynn met with officials of the Government of India, along with the National Security and Intelligence Advisor and Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs, David Morrison, over the weekend. The RCMP's position and the federal government's position is they did attempt to show your government and your policing agencies the evidence that you require, and you refuse to look at it.
So the response to this is that they wanted to leave for India on the 8th of October. They gave their completed application form only on the 8th of October. So visa needs to be affixed. For any delegation, government delegation to travel to another country, you need an agenda to go by. There was no agenda at all. So therefore, it was largely technical. I have to find the correct official on the Indian side so that the kind of things that I wanted to discuss, for which I needed an agenda. There was no agenda shared with us. Agenda was shared at the last moment, I believe, even after the flight would have departed. So it was nothing to do with it. I think it was pre-planned. They knew that the visa cannot be issued in half an hour to an hour, and therefore they did it. I think it was absolutely politically motivated.
So let me clarify here, because are you saying that that meeting couldn't take place not because Indian officials didn't want to see the evidence, but because the proper procedures hadn't been followed?
Not procedures. So visas were not there, and they needed to apply for a visa. There is a time which is taken to issue a visa. Between India and Canada, there is no visa-free agreement. So therefore, in general, I can tell you, in general, for a government official from India to come to Canada, it would take at least a week to get the visa. Same thing happens with the Canadian officials. And they just gave it to us as fait accompli. That is one. So visa is one. Second is, what did they want to talk about? That was not shared at all.
Isn't it clear, though, if the RCMP is coming to speak to their counterparts, and given what's occurred over the last year, that this would be involving the case at hand, and the case is at hand?
So I see the most important case at hand from our point of view are the 26 extradition requests and so many other arrest requests. So we would think that they are coming for that. They will hand over some of these people to us. It is not always that unless you clarify the agenda, we would exactly read your mind.
So at some point, though, and I have questions about what you mentioned in a moment, but just sticking to what the RCMP and the federal government have put forward, at some point they would have communicated, we're coming to share with you evidence that you have asked for, including in this chair, a number of months ago. We are sharing with you evidence of very serious allegations that we have made involving yourself, your colleagues, and other agents of the government of India. I guess it's confounding to me, and I imagine to people watching, why a visa or something of that nature would get in the way of India wanting to know what kind of evidence. Like, why would you not want to know all the evidence Canada has before it unless you have something to hide?
So we had been trying to get the Canadian officials, the law and order officials, to talk to their Indian parts for the last 1 year. So there, and we were the ones who have been asking for it. For last 1 year, there had been no movement. Now let's ask, why this movement now? So that was being forced on us. without having an agenda, without knowing whom to meet. See, even in like in any other large police organization or intelligence agencies, we have NIA, which is National Investigating Agency, and they will have different officials dealing with different subjects. They don't deal with Canada as such. They deal with extradition, they deal with arrest, they deal with Interpol. So what is it that they wanted to talk about? Unless that agenda is clarified, how do I get those people?
But once it is,
we are always there.
So now you know what the allegations are. Have you met? Has anybody met with the Canadian side to get that evidence?
So we are not here as our agencies. Canadian officials in their interrogation or intelligence agency will need to travel. So you travel like an official. For which, one, you give me an agenda. I will have to find out which official works on those agenda, and then whether the official is available. Because like the Canadian officials keep traveling globally, Indian officials also keep traveling globally. So if they are not in my capital, you land up, and then you say, no one met me.
I guess I take your point. I guess what's confusing on the Canadian side is that we are not used to the RCMP delivering a press conference like they did, or the federal government level. I think they are, understanding of the seriousness with which these allegations are being delivered. And I am a little perplexed that the kinds of reasons you're providing to not look at that evidence, don't seem commensurate with the crime that essentially you're all being accused of. Like, if someone accused me of being a person of interest in a murder, I'd want to know everything that they had on me, particularly if I had nothing to hide, which again allows me to circle back to the idea that you are leaving Canadians with the impression that your government does have something to hide.
Absolutely not. And in fact, we have been asking for it for last 1 year, which RCMP has also said. And then, if you do not share with us the reason for your visit, how do we know why you're? And as I told you earlier, that my premier reason which will come to my mind, that probably you are going to talk about my extradition requests, because to me that is my core concern with Canada. Your concerns could be different from us. Fine, that's the nature of diplomacy. But then I have to know. So today when I came to see you, you knew that I was coming for what purpose? So if I don't tell you, I land up and say, you know what, why don't you interview me?
I take your point, but to be fair, all I said was we requested an interview, that's all. And particularly when you know what the RCMP has, what the Canadian government, I should say, what the Prime Minister stood up and said, wouldn't it follow that the evidence you've been asking for would be delivered in such a meeting? Like, and maybe the subject that you want to bring up would be conversed about as well.
So they should have said so. If that was the...
So no, but just to be clear, nobody said we want to meet because of A, B, and C. They just said we want to meet.
No, not even meet. They said that we need visa to go to India. When it was asked to them, they said we want to meet our counterparts. Then when it was asked what will be the agenda for meeting, because I'll have to pull out those officials if they are present in India. If they're not present, we'll have to schedule it at some other time. Nothing came back. And this I'm telling very responsibly on your channel.
Okay, then let me move on to what they said in the days that followed, and very specifically and point blank put their allegations to you, particularly what came from Minister Jolie. The allegations that she makes are very serious, that you yourself are a person of interest in the murder of Hardeep Ninjar. Did you have anything to do with his murder?
Nothing at all. No evidence presented, politically motivated, and more or less, if Mr. Trudeau or his colleagues know about it, is it not a crime not to file a charge sheet? Is it not a crime not to go the judicial process?
But I mean, you're a person of interest. You haven't been accused of anything. They would like to ask you questions and therefore asked for you or your government to waive your diplomatic immunity so those questions could be asked. You would not do that.
Well, see, on what basis? They should, if you are a defendant, for an example, which I'm not, then you will be shared with the evidence on the basis of which anything can take place. And that happens even if you have been caught for a petty crime.
Well, actually, the RCMP here, or policing forces, can say they have evidence. They would like to ask you questions. They don't have to show that evidence right away. In the courts, if they charged you, for sure they would have to provide the evidence in order to get to a conviction.
If I'm going for an interrogation, I need to know what I'm interrogated for. I need to know what are the evidence that you have, so that I go prepared.
Let me put to you what Minister
Yes,
Joly
please.
said. The decision to expel these individuals was made with great consideration and only after the RCMP gathered ample, clear, and concrete evidence which identified 6 individuals as persons of interest in the Nijjar case, one of whom is you.
Which Vasi was never shared. Let me see what the concrete evidence she is talking about. As far as I'm concerned, she is talking politically. As far as I'm concerned, she has got nothing in her hand.
Do you think, though, honestly, a country like this one that does have a history relationship with India would stand up and make an accusation like that without any evidence? In all seriousness, do you think that is the case? And why would you, again, not want to know what that evidence is?
I want to know the evidence. But there has to be a way in seeking those evidence, and there has to be a way in confirming those evidence. And the first point is, please show me the evidence. And I have been talking about it from day one. Unless I know what I am being asked for, what are the evidence that you have, how do you prepare my defense?
But it's not a defense. They're simply asking questions.
It is a defense. That's what people fail to understand.
But you haven't been charged. You need a defense when you've been charged.
No,
You're just a person of
I
interest.
need a defense even when I go for interrogation. People can go to interrogation with their lawyers. So let's not complicate this issue. So if there is someone has complained that the person is a rapist, that after that complaint, the first thing that the law and order authority will interrogate. When they go for interrogation, they have a right to carry a lawyer with them.
Sure.
So
did anyone deny you that right? I mean, they just asked that you waive
they didn't even
diplomatic
share
immunity.
why I am a person of interest.
The accusation has been leveled that you and your colleagues essentially played a role in collecting information more broadly, but I imagine the allegation is specific to Mr. Nijjar as well, on his whereabouts that could be then fed to people who would have murdered him or would have been involved in other crimes in other cases. Have you, in your position, ever directed or coerced anybody into gathering information on pro-Khalistani activists that you could then later target?
All right. So first of all, I, as High Commissioner of India, had never done anything of that kind. That is one. Second, my colleagues, do we want to know what pro-Khalistani elements in Canada are doing? Yes, we do. That's my national interest. That's my core concern with Canada, which is trying to tore up Indian territory. So if the Canadian politicians are so novice that they want me not to know what my enemies are doing here, I'm sorry, then they don't know what the international relation is all about.
Are you using legal means to monitor them, or is it illegal what you're doing?
It is all overt. There is nothing covert. It's all overt. So we read the newspapers, we read their statements, since we understand Punjabi, so we read their social media posts and try to infer from there.
Has the government of India ever been involved in targeting for death any of these individuals?
Never. With full responsibility.
Do you condemn Mr. Nijjar's death? Murder?
I do condemn.
You condemn his murder?
Any murder is wrong and bad. I do condemn. And that is what I've said in many interviews. Let's get to the bottom of the issue. But to get to the bottom of the issue, there has to be evidence shared that you have, and we'll share our evidence. Don't we do that in the extradition cases? We have sent 26 dossiers to Canada. What has happened?
And I understand the point that you have around concern of a lack of action on that. Can you understand how, to Canadians, that would never justify participation in an extrajudicial murder?
It should not happen anywhere in the world. I know the countries which have done it, and some of them are G7 countries, by the way. So let's not talk about it. There should not be double standards. So as far as we are concerned, the largest democracy in the world, we are committed not to do extrajudicial killings on any territory, leave foreign countries.
The U.S. this week seems to buoy the Canadian case. They have unsealed, and I'll put the contents of it to you, and in case our audience isn't familiar, they have unsealed an indictment about an attempted murder of one of Mr. Nijjar's associates. They have revealed the name, essentially, of the individual who at the time was working in the Cabinet Secretariat of the Indian government, who contracted out another individual whom they also arrested, who then, that individual hired a hitman who was an undercover agent. they very specifically in that document talk about how there were conversations among those individuals about how Nijjar was, quote unquote, also the target, but that he was number 4 and number 3 on the list. And not to worry, because we have so many targets, we have so many targets. But the good news is this, the good news is this, now no need to wait. This is evidence. This is the indictment. This is based, this is in the courts. That's what you said you wanted.
So indictment is not conviction. Let's
correct.
understand as democracies.
I understand.
So
but you said what's submitted to a court is what you're looking for. This is being submitted to a court.
Right. So indictment is not a conviction. That's the first thing I want you to understand. And therefore, logically, it will follow its judicial process. And that we are fine with that. So much so that we ourselves formed a committee, high-level committee, to help the Americans in this. So I will not be able to talk much about it because my mandate is India-Canada relation and not India-US relations. So I will not be able to, I won't know the nitty-gritties, frankly, and I'll put it on the table. But as far as the process is concerned, when it was informed, we formed a high-level committee, and which is working in tandem with the U.S. law enforcement agencies.
They visited the U.S. this week, in fact, and it was reported that upon kind of frustration with a lack of vigor with which that committee is investigating the issue, that is why the name of the individual who was associated with the government of India very directly was unsealed. That had not been the case for months until now. Again, the connection here is made between your government and the murder of Mr. Nijjar. Do you refute this connection in this indictment?
I entirely refute this connection due to various reasons. And Canada didn't follow the practice which should have been there. Evidence should have been shared first, but someone decided to stand in the parliament and talk about a thing for which he himself has said there was no hard evidence. So let's be very clear what we are talking about. And the day on which he did that, since then, he has made it sure that the bilateral relation with India only goes downwards, spiraling down.
And I want to ask you about the future of that relationship. But again, I keep hearing you say it's about the evidence. It's about the evidence that the Prime Minister himself said there's no hard evidence. At the time, he was talking about intelligence. The RCMP, our policing agency, which is independent from politics, from the federal government, from the political motivation that you ascribe. It is an independent policing agency. Says they have evidence on this. Why don't you want to see it?
See how politically independent they are. We can discuss it till the cows come home.
They are.
That's your view. I will give you my view. So till 2 days before, they said there is no evidence to share, and in PIFI, in the Foreign Defense Committee meeting. And all of a sudden, there was all the evidence in the world available with them. So let's not go there. And the political motivation, I have been talking about it for a long time. No official, no institution can remain completely aloof of what's happening politically.
When you talk about political motivation, I imagine your government has referenced this in the past week, that you're referencing the Prime Minister in your estimation courting the 6 separatist vote. What evidence do you have that the Prime Minister would use a desire for a certain voting bloc to accuse one of our most significant trading partners and people-to-people relationships of the kind of crimes that he has? Like, do you actually think that he would take it so lightly and care so much about his own sort of political victories to put this relationship at risk? Isn't that hard to believe?
I think Mr. Trudeau should respond to it because that's what he did.
That's what you're accusing him of, and I don't see any evidence of that.
But the problem is that when he accused, he himself has admitted that there was no hard evidence.
But there was intelligence shared with him by our Five Eyes allies.
On the basis of intelligence, if you want to destroy a relationship, be my guest.
But the intelligence,
and that's what he did.
But perhaps the intelligence, as it's described in this indictment, is about a crime so severe in nature that it's impossible for him to ignore. Could that not be understandable?
Listen, if there is such a compelling evidence, why haven't they gone to the court of law so far?
Well, the RCMP has. The 8 individuals have been charged with homicides,
but
22
that is not the case.
In relation to extortion.
That is not the case. Case is linking of so-called agents of the government of India. That case is murder. And any criminal who is here, some of them came here as innocent international students, and they turned into criminals in this country. I don't know what happened.
Sure.
How did they get influenced? I have no information on that.
Well, they're alleging that that's where you and your colleagues play a role. That's what I'm saying. That I understand that you're saying you don't, but the allegation connected to these that the RCMP very clearly presented is that you and your colleagues were involved in coercing these individuals in some ways to commit crimes, some violent in nature, in order to further your cause.
Just to reframe your thing a bit, if they have evidence of what we have coerced, which can be legally accepted, why are they not sharing it? Because
I think they wanted
because the evidence, what they call these evidence, are hearsay, and I know for sure that they go from one person to the other, asking them about the hearsay. Most of them are those who are pro-Khalistan elements, anti-India elements, anti-India Canada elements. And then they take that as evidence.
The only thing I would respond to say to that is that I've read the U.S. indictment very closely, which is similar in nature in the allegations that are being made. And it's not just hearsay. They have an individual who has listened and been a part of the conversations directly with a person who represents the government of India, who is telling them to murder someone who espouses the views that you are concerned about. That is not just hearsay.
Does Canada has that?
Well, I'm saying this.
So let's not talk
but this involves Neugar.
These are two different countries, two different crimes taken place. The place of crime are different, and therefore I would expect very much the Canadian government to come out clean, showing me the evidence of anything.
If you can take issue with them, I understand that. I'm saying, from my perspective, having read it, that isn't just hearsay, that the connection they lay out to the government of India and Mr. Nijjar's murder is not just hearsay, it is based on evidence that they have spelled out.
But see, that is why there is a high-level committee and talking to them. Canadians have not given, I shouldn't say Canadians, the Canadian agencies which are talking to us have not given a shred of evidence, including on the 12th October meeting in Singapore, for us to act upon. You cannot, see, gone are the days when the so-called developed countries or Western Bloc would ask a developing country, you must do this, and they will run after them and do it. We are a rule of law country, as Canada prides itself to be a rule of law country. So won't you give me evidences which are suitable for my own legal process? So therefore, these are two.
They wanted to give it. That's all I'll say. They wanted.
Why haven't they given it earlier? And if they have not, then on what basis these statements are being made?
Before we go, I do want to ask you about the larger picture of the relationship as you leave, because it is a significant relationship, both in an economic and in other sense. First of all, will your colleagues be replaced? Like, will you and your colleagues, when you leave, is the government of India going to replace you?
That is a discussion we will have with the Canadian side. Largely, given the mistrust that we have on Mr. Trudeau and his team, we'll have concerns, and we'll discuss it very carefully with them. Our security and safety are concerned. So there are so many things. Khalistani extremists are being encouraged all the time. I also know, again, this is my allegation, I'm not giving you any evidence on that. I also know that some of these Khalistani extremists and terrorists are deep assets of CSIS. So I'm giving that acquisition. Again, I'm not giving you an evidence.
Without evidence, just the same thing you're
criticizing
criticizing
the government.
Did. Yes. Yeah, but why would you do the same thing you're criticizing the government of?
Because that is what is understood by the Canadian politicians. That someone stands on the floor of the parliament, says something which he later says, I didn't have any hard evidence. And that was taken as biblical truth.
But you're criticizing the Prime Minister, and then I'll just point out doing the same thing. I want to move on, though, because I asked if you will be replaced. Will your government allow the Canadian diplomats who have been expelled to be replaced?
But see, the same thing. It is a matter of conversation between the two governments. As far as the relationship itself is concerned, it is a large relationship. Canada had been a friend of India. Canada will remain a friend of India. There had been issues between two countries that many countries have. That's not a surprise. We only want the Canadian regime of the day, the government of the day, to understand my core concerns and try to act on that sincerely, rather than being bedfellows with those who are trying to challenge Indian sovereignty and territorial integrity. And mind you, the largest Sikh population in the world is in India. They undergo elections at least every 5 years. Their election voting percentage is much higher than any time of Canadian elections. So I can go on and on this, but the short point is that what happens to India will be decided by Indians. These Khalistani terrorists and extremists who are based out of Canada are not Indians, they are Canadian citizens, and no government should encourage their citizens to attack sovereignty and territorial integrity of the country.
And to be clear, the government of India should not seek to extrajudicially harm those people.
Come with you. I'm extremely...
Correct?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely.
And just one final question
Yes,
on what happens with the relationship going forward. Our trade minister has explicitly said that she does not anticipate the trade relationship be impacted by this. Is that the view also of your government?
Absolutely.
It is.
Absolutely. People-to-people relationship, trade relationship, cultural relationship. So everything, science and technology, and education, those relationships have got nothing to do with it. This is a very different conversation what we were having today. And there will be emotions on both sides, and we cannot stop that. So there will be emotions which may impact a few of those deals. But larger picture is that I don't see much impact on non-political bilateral relations.
Okay, I will leave it on that note. Thank you, High Commissioner.
Thank you very much. Thank you so much.